For more now, we're joined by Sarasota attorney Jeff Young, known as the gun lawyer locally, and Keith Fitzgerald, former Democratic state lawmaker and also a political science professor at New College. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
So, Keith, what happened in Tallahassee? Why did the nowhere near the threshold to get a special session approved on this issue?
Sure. One of the things that goes on in politics, is a normal part of it, is people try to take positions to make points. Sometimes they try to highlight differences. I think sometimes it goes too far, becomes too partisan. Sometimes it's a really important part of the process. So the members of the legislature who wanted to use this call for a special session did so because they were trying to highlight the inactivity of the state legislature on the effort to keep people who are on the watch list from being able to buy a gun.
So there are certain, let's say, Democrats who are for more gun control who still didn't vote for a special session on this issue?
Well, the person you had in the package actually voted against gun control on several different occasions. So this isn't a 100% issue in either party. But I think some people understood that a point was being made, but also understood that a bill wasn't going to pass, so they weren't in favor of the special session. And, you know, people play political games occasionally. One of the people who pushed for this idea has supported the NRA on everything they've ever done, but he's running for Congress in the area where the shooting happened, and he found religion and decided he wanted to be in front of the parade for stricter gun control. So there were some good motives, there may be some not so good motives, but that's just how politics works.
And some say a special session will be too expensive for taxpayers regardless.
Yeah, I think they usually run something in the realm of a few $100,000 a day. It depends on how important the issue is, though. So I think I might argue that this is one of those issues that's worth a few $100,000 for us to have a serious conversation. But really, I don't think anyone thought that there was ever a chance that a special session was going to happen.
Symbolic in proposal. All right. Jeff, where do you stand on all this? I'll just lob you a softball. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you can just put me in the camp with Representative Stubbe and the other people on the pro-Second Amendment side that I think this was clearly just an attention-grabbing action by the legislature, similar to when the Democrats in Washington staged their sit-in where they sat on the floor and refused to get up after a while. They were simply just trying to garner attention, as he said, but I think it's, you know, it's indicative of where we are in politics in 2016 in America, where you have a tragedy like this or a terrorist attack like this, an atrocity that happens, and instead of trying to come together or working out solutions on these things, everybody picks political sides, they start doing political theater, and they try and push agendas that lots of people don't want to be pushed. So you end up with a situation like this where they try these politics and they try to exploit these situations, knowing full well that they weren't going to get anywhere, just like the Democrats in Washington, D.C. did. But, you know, it gets on the news, it gets their names out there, it gets political points during a campaign season, and I think that's what they were only trying to accomplish.
Is there any part of the Second Amendment that you'd be willing to pull back 10% on at all?
Well, I mean, that's a trick question. I mean, my gut reaction is no. The Second Amendment guarantees, in my opinion, an individual's right to possess and bear arms. And it's quite clear that's what the founders intended. That's what's written in there. I mean, there's a lot of already laws out there that have pulled back on the Second Amendment. We have more gun laws now than we've ever had. There's all kinds of gun laws on the books. We have the background checks, and a lot of states have mandatory waiting periods and bans on certain items. So I think it's been pulled back quite a bit. So I think where we are now is perfectly reasonable.
You know, the Second Amendment has not been pulled back. The Supreme Court reaffirmed in a couple of different ways this session that state and local governments do have the power to regulate guns within the broader framework of the Wilkinson's decision. And let me just say, every time something like this happens, the folks on the NRA side say it's not the right time to talk about this issue. But it turns out it's never the right time to talk about this issue. So sometimes when the political system just won't respond to the popular will, people in politics have to take some measures to get attention to their side. So I think it was quite defensible what the Democrats did in this case.
When you were a lawmaker in Tallahassee, were you approached by the NRA?
Oh, I was approached by the NRA on every single issue that ever came up. And I was not considered to be a uniform foe. I wasn't considered to be a guaranteed vote yes. But I think there are reasonable things we can do, but you have to have that conversation sometime. And it never seems to be the right time for the people who are on the NRA side. So I think that's really the point that's being made here.
Even assault weapons, you don't think they can be, are they needed? Assault weapons needed in society?
Well, there's a couple different issues. Number one, assault weapons is a term that can't be defined. Assault is an action, it's not an item. I was a former prosecutor and I'm a defense attorney now. There is already an assault ban on the books. There's a law that says assault is a crime. So assault is an action, it's not a weapon, it's not a product that is sold on the market. I basically sum it up this way. A terrorist without an AR-15 is still capable of mass murder. An AR-15 without a terrorist isn't capable of anything. It will just lay here on the table and do nothing all day. So I think the issue of when you try and phrase it as assault weapon, it's a concept that doesn't exist. They're easy buzzwords that I think anti-gun people like to throw out there because it sounds scary. They put up pictures of these dark black guns with all the stuff on it, which aren't any different than what your normal hunting rifle would be. It just looks different because it comes in a different package. So it's not an issue of assault weapons or large capacity magazines. It's an issue of who's using them and for what purpose. And if a law-abiding citizen wants to use them for a law-abiding purpose, whether it be hunting, shooting, home defense, self-defense, they should be allowed to do that, and they shouldn't be punished because the unlawful citizen wants to use them for nefarious means.
Go ahead.
Well, I don't give a hoot about the semantics of it, whether you call it an assault weapon or not. That's just a red herring. Every time this stuff comes up, we get these lectures about what an assault rifle is and what it is and what is not. A guy who had anger management issues and had been on the terrorist watch list 2 different times was able to get a hold of a weapon that enabled him to wound 100 people and kill 49 in a matter of a few minutes' time. That raises some issues.
Right, but the problem is...
And we should be able to have a conversation about it rather than getting a lecture about what is and isn't an assault weapon. That sounds like something we ought to be able to do something about in public policy. So let's have the conversation about what's appropriate and not lectures about what words mean.
Well, I'll have a conversation about that. What's appropriate is this is all allegedly in response to the Orlando terrorist attack. But the law that they were proposing, this no-fly, no-buy, and he just said it again, this if you're on the terrorist watch list, you can't buy an AR-15. Well, guess what? This individual wasn't on the terror watch list at the time that he purchased this gun, despite the fact that he was interviewed repeatedly by the FBI and under watch by the federal government. They did not have him on a terrorist list at the time. He passed a background check. So whenever these incidents happen, they always talk about, well, we need to have universal background checks. Well, he passed that. Or as this session was for, we need to have a no-fly, no-buy. He wasn't on the no-fly list. So none of these laws that they want to have this conversation about would have done anything to prevent what happened in Orlando, because that individual went through all the legal loops that he was allowed to go through and was still able to purchase this firearm. So short of an outright ban of guns in general, whether they're assault weapons, whether they're high-capacity magazines, whether they're handguns, there's no way to prevent somebody from doing something like that.
Well, and that's the other classic argument that's always made here. First we get the semantics, then we get the slippery slope argument, that either you have some ineffective ban over here, or you have a total, absolute ban. Nobody called for any total, absolute bans of any weapons.
Right, you're calling for laws that wouldn't do anything.
Would you let me finish?
Go ahead.
Come on. Nobody's calling for any absolute bans of anything. Nobody's talking about any confiscation. In fact, he is correct that this would not have even, the proposal that these people were coming up with would not have even prevented this. It was simply an effort in the wake of this event to ask the question, can we do some common sense things? Now listen, I have some real questions about the policy that was proposed personally, because there are due process concerns. If you start taking away a right without enabling a person to have some kind of challenge to that right being taken away, I think we have to ask questions. And we want to make sure that this would be equally applied. So I'm not an absolutist on this issue at all. But you can't go from, well, unless you come up with a complete and absolute 100% ban, you can't do anything. It's true, this would not have even stopped this guy, which shows you how reasonable and limited the basic concept these folks were talking about was.
Les, to comment?
But he's wrong in the sense that the point of this session and your entire article or the video clip that you played before this was to have the no-fly, no-buy terrorist list. It wasn't to start a common sense gun phrase legislation. It was to specifically pass this law in response to Orlando, which wouldn't have stopped Orlando or any of these other mass shootings that we have. So once again, you just have political points, political talking situations, people trying to push an agenda, and people don't like that.
Jeff, Keith, thank you both for your time. A good discussion. We can do it again, go for 2 hours next time, hopefully. We'll have some viewer comments on last night's show after this. Stay with us.